I got a lot of opinions on maps. I'm a dungeon master and forever DM, which means I have to have a lot of knowledge of at least where my stories are taking place. Except I'm bad at that, so I've been using maps to make up for it. And therefore, all my sessions I've been running for the Talon Company game have made a lot of maps. This episode is going to be me talking about not only my opinions on maps, also a showcase of all the maps but one for the Talon Company game. So let's get into it. So this is my second session for the Talon Company game, where we only had 2 players, and I kind of knew that going in. So it was just a pretty easy cash grab. Not cash grab, but like a little bit of a heist, like a quick gas station robbery almost. The session took place in an old abandoned crystal mine, and their whole objective was go in, seize as much loot as possible without being killed, and get out. No noble cause, this wasn't done or authorized by the company, so I made sure there was a bunch of little subsections, like little mine outs, little tunnels, the Nook Shop, which is a whole thing, and I made sure there was a lot of weird combat. That circle room with the weird circular bits, that one was a death kiss that they had to fight. Like super small hashed line room was a animated, trying to think of the name, animated dungeon. It was a mimic dungeon. And that was an Anheg dig out. And that is a temple for one of my players. Notice that whenever I make maps, I tend to make things way too out of proportion. Either like crates that are huge or boxes or rails that are super small. You can see it like really bad in this church that I made for my third session. The stairways were okay, but machinery was way too oversized, and these roads are massive. It tends to be a continuing thing throughout most of my maps. Also worthwhile to point out, I numbered the buildings based on how tall they were instead of actually detailing the entire insides, which saved a shitload of time, but at the cost of immersion. Pretty standard church with the main entrance, followed by pews up to the main pedestal, which would eventually turn the church into a rogue defender. In the very back is a graveyard cemetery, where my players became little grave robbers, marked and indicated by blue X's on the graves that they robbed, ultimately ending in a cadaver collector. You can see how I used to detail rooms really hasn't changed from how I now detail rooms. A lot of green boxes. I indicate the biggest objects and leave small descriptions and what's on the walls to actual playtime. Now the next session was also at the church, but in its continuum defender state. So in order to do this, I need to make a map that was much smaller, as I didn't have the luxury of paper size. This smaller map is generally the same as the old church, but now redefined as mechanical defender, and also much smaller. Besides that, pretty much the same. This map did reveal, however, that the church had a much more extensive basement than they originally thought. Everything in green they have seen before, and was the mechanical parts that drive the church defender. Everything in dark blue is the actual dungeon below one of the trapdoors. The dungeon was a funhouse dungeon, lots of windy turns, in every single corridor, a brand new trap, puzzle, or gimmick. In the same session of the church monster, they also went to the Talon Company office building to have a discussion with HR and Mr. Talon himself. Fun stuff. I also tried to include some goofy parts to my map. In session 5, instead of visiting one small location, they went to the city of Lynbrook, an entire city similar to that of Detroit. I tried to include as much realism as I could by packing everything into one small area of the map. In addition to being not a singular place, this was one of the few maps that I actually added color to. Session 5 of Storm King's Stronghold was taking place at a stronghold. This meant not a singular location, not an entire city, but something entirely new to me. A actual almost castle. Pretty fun stuff. I tried to include a lot of different things that they were familiar with to introduce this new concept of impenetrable fortress. I added a small dungeon that they all unanimously loved, enjoyed, and went completely flawlessly. All the combat in there was perfect, no room took way too long, all the puzzles were challenging and interesting and fun, with no hard time constraints at all, and everything was extremely rewarding, and this wasn't at all a gag dungeon. This eventually led out to the laboratory. Now, the laboratory was actually really fun for me because I was thinking of how they would use this laboratory, which parts would need to go where, how big of a part would need to be dedicated just to like materials like Jack the Ripper. Is there a medical wing in this laboratory? Is there a built-in observation room? Is there an R&D department? All of these, yes. And all of them were incredibly fun to design. I gotta say, this might be one of the most successful things in this entire session. Now, my players didn't spend much time on the actual top floor or ground level of the stronghold, but it was pretty realistically made, so I would imagine there wouldn't be any in-game problems with it, and I'm pretty proud of how it actually turned out. With the stronghold being on the mountain, I actually got to play around with some elevation features by the end of the session. Pretty fun.